Heard me a few seconds ago.
I was like, who's he describing?
You know, it is funny to hear people talk about your life and your work. And when people talk about, you know, what I do, I have the same reaction. Like who the hell are you talking about?
Right.
Because from the inside, it doesn't feel the same way.
You're absolutely right.
Now, I need you tonight to take my audience somewhere they can't go without you. Okay? I wanted you to come on because I need you to take this audience down into a few low places.
Oh, I can do that.
And to do it in such a way that will not just inspire people about where they are, but make people who are living good lives feel grateful that they avoided some of the things you could not. So let's begin with your house. Because one of the things I was able to read about you is that you grew up in a house of addiction and abuse.
Yes and no. Yes and no. So I was adopted, born in 1966 in Massachusetts by an African-American father and an Irish woman. Back then, Irish women didn't come home pregnant. And they certainly didn't come home pregnant from a black man.
With a black kid.
Right.
In Massachusetts.
Man, in Boston Central. It was not pretty. You know, they had the Catholic nuns over there sprinkling her with holy water, the whole thing. And so under pressure from her family, she was forced to put me up for adoption. And Catholic Charities handed that adoption. And here's an interesting caveat to that. A Catholic family in Boston in 1966 wasn't going to take in a biracial child. And so Catholic Charities actually took me to an orphanage called the Home for Little Wanderers.
The Catholic Charities were racist and didn't want a biracial child.
They couldn't, I don't know if you could say racist didn't want as much as can't do anything with them. Two Catholic people looking to adopt were not going to take a biracial child in Boston at that time. Wasn't going to happen. And so they took me to an orphanage, the Home for Little Wanderers in Somerville, Massachusetts, and I was fortunate enough to be adopted by really beautiful people. I mean, you know, there was alcoholism on my father's part. Today we would call my mom emotionally abusive. Back then we called it discipline. But she took it to an extreme. You know, it wasn't physical abuse, it was more just a restrictive cocoon placed around me.
Give me an example of what you mean.
At 7 o'clock on a summer night, I'm in the house and locked in my room while all the other kids are out playing.
Physically locked in?
Not locked in with a padlock, just you're not going anywhere. But all the other kids are playing, Mom. I don't care what they're doing, you're staying in the house. You know, just overly done things. I knew how to make hospital corners on beds as a little child. I knew, you know, over cleaning the tub and the bathtub and, you know, just all those things. She was just very strict. She was very strict and very set in her ways.
But your father was an alcoholic.
My father was an alcoholic of a different variety. He was an alcoholic of a kind variety. He wasn't a violent drunk. And this is where, when we say, how do you get alcoholism, right? How does that happen to somebody? I don't know if it's a gene thing where my biological father was also and I caught a gene, or if it was the attraction of watching my father as a young boy that really made alcohol to me attractive. You know, so the setup was this. We lived in neighboring cities. My father had gone up the street in one of his escapades and gotten somebody pregnant, and my mom left him. And so she lived in one town, he lived in another, and he would pick me up Friday nights. And he would pick me up with a bottle of vodka between his legs and Schlitz beer in the car. And, you know, back then we didn't have seatbelts or any of that stuff, right? And we would go, my very first memory in life is a big yellow sign that said Cappy's Liquor Store. And we would go to the liquor store and he would get his weekend supply. But he would do something magical, right? While we were in the store, he would say, get whatever you want. And for a young man who's got a very strict mother, Friday night was like, what? And so I'd get the soda pop and the candy cigarettes, and every time he opened a beer, I opened a soda.
But you know, more importantly, what he was doing was conditioning you.
Absolutely.
Right, he was conditioning you to be open and to be accessible for his disease.
Absolutely.
That's what he was doing.
Absolutely.
Now, you say something that I thought was remarkable about his funeral. And what happened when he died. Well, let's take it a step back. Tell the audience about when he died and how he was found.
So
You got to hear this.
he drank himself to death. Lee died, the death certificate states chronic alcoholism as the cause of death. And what had happened is over the course of the years, alcohol pushed everybody who ever loved him away from him. And so nobody checked on him. And the way it ended was he died with a bottle of vodka in his hand, and he was dead for 3 days. And the postman actually smelled him coming through the mail slot and called the police. That's how he was found. And he died alone. He died alone.
Wow, just stop for a second, because, you know, I want everybody in this audience and everybody who is watching this show to understand what this disease does to people, you know, and that people who might have been so much better and so much bigger than what they ended up being, in the grips of this thing, you end up living out your worst nightmares.
We got a long way to go. I got a lot of story for you. I'll tell you.
Because I mean the whole notion. Because one of my greatest fears used to be. I don't have this fear anymore. One of my greatest fears used to be dying alone. Dying. That was one of my greatest fears.
Mine too.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And a lot of people, you know, have that fear. But to hear that your dad had to live through that, go through that, how did it affect you at the time, and how does it affect you now?
Ooh. At the time, I wasn't surprised. At the time, I had, you know, been through rehabilitation centers. I had had bouts of sobriety. I had been introduced to a solution to my problem. And I had heard the war stories in the rooms of 12 Steps about people who did die that way. I was not surprised. The last time I saw my father alive, it was so saddening. That part shocked me.
Tell me about that.
He had gotten to a point where the house was just, I got to paint a picture for you.
Yeah,
this
please.
was a brilliant man. My father was a track star in high school, slated to run on the U.S. Olympic team, ran in the Nationals at Madison Square Garden. He ran the 440, fell down on cinders, got up, won the race. He was bad. He was bad. And what happened was he never drank alcohol, but he used to get a dopamine rush from running. So he wasn't the fastest all the time, but he would get up in the morning and run on the beach and then run home and then run to school and go to track practice and run back home and then go back down to the beach. He just ran constantly. And he got drafted, went into the Army, had his first beer, and he never ran again. Because he got the same effect quickly from alcohol that he was getting while he was running. Had a brilliant career with the telephone company and made some wise financial decisions, so he was self-supporting through his own contribution, and that's why you couldn't tell him nothing.
But take me back to the house.
Okay, so the house was decrepit now, beautiful home, run down. He had really relegated his entire life to his bedroom, to the point where he struggled walking so much, and I'm going to get a little graphic here, he wouldn't go downstairs to urinate anymore. He just kept a bucket, took it down in the morning and emptied it. You know, and I'm talking about a brother that was like booted and suited back in the 70s, you know, looked so good. He was just terrible. He looked 90 years old. They had cut off a couple of his toes from alcoholic diabetes had set in. And you know, I honestly believe that at some point he was introduced to a solution, but he made a conscious decision not to do anything about it. I really believe Lee made the decision, I'm going to drink myself to death. I really feel that's where it went.
You know what's interesting about that? A few years ago, a friend of mine, mom died, and on the death certificate, the cause of death was failure to thrive. Failure to thrive.
Wow.
And when I saw that, I said to myself, I will never forget what I see here today.
Right.
That you can die just from failing to thrive. And that you can die because you have chosen not to live.
That's right.
That you have chosen that it's better for you to give up your life.
Yep. Yep.
I can't imagine, I'm not the son of an alcoholic, so I can't imagine, even now, just thinking about the fact that the man that raised you, that you were a part of his world, his life, what it must feel like, even as a man, to have to talk about your father in this way. Because let me say this, as polished as you are, and as successful as you are, that is still the man that raised you.
Oh yeah, he sure did. And you know, when I look back at the dynamic of my mom and dad raising me, and I wonder why my mom was so strict, she was trying to protect me from that road. You know, hindsight being 2020,
right.
You know, she was a strong sister trying to, I want the best for my son. I'm not going to let him be like his dad. And she couldn't stop it. She couldn't stop it.
She couldn't.
Couldn't.
And your descent into addiction was profound. Was profound. Talk to us about how it began, because I want people to realize, because you kind of already have, just being around it and being conditioned by it, but the actual moment when you descend can be so seductive and so subtle.
It started with the soda pop. See, alcoholism as a disease, alcohol and drugs aren't my problem. Right? My problem is life without alcohol and drugs in them. Without alcohol, I'm irritable, restless, discontent. I'm mad at the world. I don't think I have what I should have. You know, all these things are going me, selfish to the core, right? And my father, in that conditioning, fed into that at a very young age. So when I got to that liquor store and he said, get anything you want, and I could eat all the candy and soda pop I wanted, and then Sunday night, I'm dropped back off to a mother who said, you already had a snack. I gave you an apple 2 hours ago. Go to bed. See? How does a child make that decision, right? And which decision does that child make? 9 out of 10 children are going to say, give me what I want, right?
But you, at what age did you sink into addiction?
If I had to say one momentous occasion, it was when I was 13 years old. My father had taken me to the Bahamas for a vacation, summertime. At this time, the dynamic had changed. I now went to school in Dallas with my mom, lived with her half the year, and then spent every summer with my dad. So we went to the Bahamas and we went to the Playboy Hotel. My dad's judgment on where he should take a child.
From the Playboy Hotel.
Right? And they had a show there called Bustin' Loose. And I was 13 years old. We go into the thing, and the man tells my father he has to have 3 drinks. It's 3-drink minimum. My dad said, man, he's 13 years old. Guys, it does not matter. 3 drinks. And so you know, I'm a man's man, so I got 3 Bahama Mamas. And I was off and running, man. From that, I mean, there was red velvet wallpaper, there were bubbles, boobs, balloons, you know, just everything a 13-year-old kid, you know, I'm like, wow, right? And by this time, my father had gotten into a routine where he typically passed out around 2 or 3 in the afternoon. And so the next day when he did that, I realized that I could drink in the Bahamas. And so that day, without anybody having to teach me, I went down to the pool and walked up and said, my father wants a rum and coke. And so it was off and running.
This question just came to me, because is it normal for addicts or people dealing with the disease to be able to pinpoint the day?
No. It's a gradual progression. So I think alcoholism and addiction are 2 separate different things.
How so?
Well, alcoholism, I think you're predisposed to. I really believe that I needed to drink as an alcoholic a long time before I was 13. I was wound tighter than a drum, man. I was mad at the world, hated everything. Once I had that drink, I got that, my shoulders dropped, everything was happy, right? Addiction is, I'll give it to you this way. You take 100 people, put them in a room, give them alcohol for 30 days straight. When they walk out of that room, 10 of them are going to go back to the bar. The rest are never going to touch alcohol. You take 30 people and put them in a room and give them crystal meth, cocaine, or heroin for 30 days, all of them are coming out addicted to that drug. That's the difference. One's a predisposition, one is you catch it.
Right.
Right? That's been my
Or rather, it
experience.
catches you.
Or it catches you.
It grabs you in such a way that it won't let you go.
Right? You know when they talk about marijuana being a gateway drug, you've heard that term?
Yeah, yeah.
It's not a gateway drug in the sense that now this high doesn't work, I'm seeking something stronger. It's a gateway drug because in order to buy a bag of weed, I got to go over to the dope man's house, and eventually I'm going to meet that dude who's got a little cocaine. He's going to turn me onto that. Right? It puts me in a part of society that introduces me to the next steps.
Brings you into a world
right.
that you might have avoided
exactly.
had you not been connected in the first place.
Exactly.
You know,